Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we are going to be reading true classroom horror stories. I hope you enjoy them. Before getting into the stories, though, I want to tell a couple of my own. Story 1. Imagine a teacher, Miss Johnson, diligently preparing her lesson plans when suddenly she gets a phone call from her bank letting her know that her account had just been drained. Miss Johnson, knowing that she had not drained her own account, knew that her personal information had fallen into the wrong hands. Cybercriminals exploit her compromised data, wreaking havoc on her financial accounts and even impersonating her online. The principal of the school that Mrs. Johnson teaches at sees the things that are being posted in Miss Johnson's name and promptly fires her. Miss Johnson has now lost her savings, her career, her credibility, and her own name. Story 2. For this story, let's explore the life of a student, Alex, who innocently clicked on a malicious link while trying to do research for his history project at home. Unbeknownst to Alex, that single click unleashed a torrent of malware, infecting not only his computer, but every device in his home connected to his router. Chaos ensued as his parents had their online accounts hacked, credit card numbers stolen, and personal information leaked. Those two stories, while hypothetical situations, are real-life things that can occur. These are terrifying situations that could happen to anyone. But don't worry, there's hope. And that hope is the sponsor of today's video, Aura. Their extensive dark web monitoring would have alerted Miss Johnson the moment her information was compromised, allowing her to take immediate action and prevent further damage. Aura's identity theft monitoring features are designed to protect individuals like Miss Johnson from falling victim to cybercriminals. Aura's advanced cybersecurity measures could have also prevented Alex's nightmare scenario. Their intelligent safety platform acts as a powerful shield, detecting and blocking malware, ransomware, and other cyber threats. With Aura's robust protection, you can ensure the security of you and your child's digital environments. I'm actually subscribed to Aura myself, and when I first signed up, I realized that my email address and password was being shared on the dark web. As you can imagine, that was a very scary notification, because if someone was able to access my email, then they would also be able to access this YouTube channel and destroy it. However, Aura notified me of the threat, and I was able to update my passwords and keep my account protected. It's really easy to set up, so you don't have to download several different apps to get things like parental controls, antivirus, VPN, password management, identity theft insurance, and more. You get everything at one affordable price. Let Aura do the hard work of keeping you safe online, so you can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. You can either let people continue to exploit and profit off of your private information, or you can go to aura.com/innerscare to start your 2-week free trial, also linked in the description down below and in the pinned comment. Thank you again to our sponsor Aura for shedding light on the real horrors lurking in the digital realm and providing solutions to protect against them. And now, without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories. This story is 100% true, and honestly the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. At the age of 15, I moved to Southwest Houston. I had moved around for many years, primarily due to being in foster care and not really having a strong support system or family. Houston itself is somewhat nice, but naturally I had to be placed in a home in probably one of the most ghetto parts of the city. I was honestly one of the only Caucasian people in the area, which made it somewhat difficult to make friends due to cultural differences and so on. I met a guy named David who had a girlfriend at the time. We soon became very close, and he became very flirtatious and somewhat protective over me. I also noticed that he was deeply involved with drugs and had some major anger issues. I didn't realize how truly mentally unstable he was until after hanging around with him and his girlfriend for a few months. One day, we skipped school and we went to the nearest skate park. Naturally, as young burnouts, we just lounged around, smoked weed, spray painted, and kept busting our butts on the ramps at the park. After about 30 minutes, we were approached by several guys wearing fully black clothing. I recognized a couple of them from my biology class. Next thing I knew, they began to attack David. He was thrown onto the ground, being kicked and punched repeatedly. I did my best to try and pry them off of David, but that only ended in me receiving several blows to the stomach and several other areas of my body until I could barely get up. That day, we both ended up in the emergency room. David told me not to breathe a word to anyone about what happened, which only created more problems for me. But I listened because for some odd reason I trusted him. A week later, David found me in the hallway early in the morning before first period. He pulled me to the side and looked around anxiously, his eyes darting back and forth between different parts of the hallway. "What's going on?" I asked, completely thrown off by his sudden erratic behavior. "Those guys are going to pay for what they did to us," he whispered softly. "What do you mean?" I said nervously. "I have a gun. Miranda has one too. I'm going to take care of those guys today. Go home," he said through gritted teeth, reaching into his backpack and slowly revealing a black handgun. I quickly placed my hand on his, pushing his hand further down into the backpack. "David, don't let anyone see that," I whispered quickly. My heart was pounding, my head was spinning, and I felt a deep pit in my stomach. My mind raced 90 miles an hour. What was wrong with him? Why did his girlfriend Miranda have a gun? What do I do? "I don't want you to get hurt. I need to protect you. Both of you. I trust you, and I know you won't tell anyone," he said quietly, his eyes softening. My thoughts continued to race, and I did the only thing I could, try to get away from him and tell someone immediately. "All right, whatever you're going to do, just wait. Let me get my foster sisters out first, okay?" He nodded, and surprisingly, he let me go. I raced down 2 flights of stairs, across the school courtyard, and finally made it to the principal's office. I opened the door without even knocking, which made our principal mad, but I cut him off before he could say anything and said, "David F. and Miranda H. both have handguns. They both brought guns into the school." A few minutes later, the school was put into lockdown, and my only 2 friends I had that entire school year were arrested. There were news reports. Officers questioned me, and as you can imagine, I was grounded for quite a while for my choice of friends. I later decided to move away from that area because I wasn't sure what would happen to me if they somehow got out while I was still in the area. I don't know if they really planned to use the guns on campus. I just know that I was scared. For me, for the other students, for the faculty. All I know is that maybe I saved someone's life that day, and I don't regret it. Three to 4 years ago, I was taking a night class back during my first year of college. I had attended a college where night classes were more common, so I took 2 night classes per week. I would have 2 early morning classes 3 times a week. One would be a lab. During the second week of my Monday night class, my professor had assigned us into groups for our finale. We had to research and create a PowerPoint with everything we learned along the way, so every 2 weeks we would get together in class to work on it. We were also allowed to meet outside of class to work on the project too. After getting assigned into groups, there were 4 other people in my group. We had exchanged names and such and went on our merry way. The next week, I remember this clearly because I was taking a nap and had woken up from a Facebook message. It was a guy from night class in my finale group. He had mentioned that he had a question about class, so I asked what was up. He then responded and said he figured it out, so I didn't respond back. A couple of minutes later, he messaged me again, asking me if I had the other group members' information so he could add them on Facebook. I figured he was going to make a group chat for us, but that never happened. The next meeting, we had agreed to meet outside of class, since we never have enough time in class to finish talking. But when the time came, it was only he and I who came to discuss. Instead of discussing, he started talking to me about his ex. I didn't know what to do, so I gave him advice and I just listened to him while working on other assignments for other classes. After that, he started showing up at my study area. A couple of weeks passed by and I didn't really mind him coming to talk to me when he felt like he needed a vent and advice. I was used to it. So, one night, in my Wednesday night class, I received a message from him. He had asked me to go grab dinner with him. I had told him that I couldn't because I was in class and that I had plans after class. He said, "Come on, it's just dinner. I have no one to eat with." I simply said no, I have stuff to do after class. But he wouldn't budge and kept saying I was making excuses, saying I had plans and such because I didn't want to go out and grab dinner with him. And truthfully, I didn't want to go. But I had family in the hospital, and it was my only time to go see them. After denying him, I stopped showing up to class because I was creeped out. He would always sit with me in class. He would always ask me to grab lunch and dinner with him. He would be very pushy, even when I told him I had to study or that I had plans. After some time, he would message me and tell me that he knew where my mom worked. I would ask how, and he would say he saw someone who looked like me but much older. But he was in fact correct because that was my mom. A week after he messaged me about finding where my mom worked, we had bumped into each other while my mom and I were at Cub's picking up some last-minute stuff for dinner. My mom had asked who the man was, and I told her just a dude from class. He really creeps me out. And she would be pushy also about dating him and giving him a chance because he was handsome. I told her I felt uncomfortable and that I didn't want to talk about it anymore. At this point, it was at the end of the semester. We had about 2 weeks left, and I still hadn't gone back to Monday night class. I was for sure creeped out at this point. Non-stop messages and non-stop trying to grab food together, even after I had said no multiple times. This one morning, I had walked out of my morning class and noticed his backpack on the floor by the stairs. He had been sitting there by himself. So I slowly backed away and went through the back stairway. My anxiety was so high. I walked away from campus and called my cousin to come get me because my mom had driven me to school that morning. After telling my cousin about him, I was advised to transfer and file a report, which I didn't file a report because I stopped seeing him around after I blocked him everywhere. 2 years ago, I had joined a group at a different university where we performed to a live audience. I had stopped going out to these things because I was scared of seeing him, but after some time I figured it was safe to go since my sister and I would be together. I had also started dating someone, currently my ex, while we were performing at a college. I noticed a familiar face in the crowd watching me. I wasn't wearing my glasses, so I couldn't really tell, but I was singing at the far right, and from the corner of my eye, I could see him just staring at me. So after I got off stage, I told my lead that I didn't feel safe. I then told my sister and my boyfriend. I was around all of my friends, so I felt safer than I did when I was all alone. I thought I was safe, but as I walked back into the room to grab my jacket, he started walking towards me, staring at me. So I turned around, and I hate it till this day. I don't wear heels anymore, but I tripped, and surprisingly, my boyfriend was right behind me. He caught me and asked where I was going. He told me that since there was someone stalking me there, I shouldn't go do stuff alone in case something happened. He pulled me to the side and covered me till the man passed by. A few months after that incident, he surprisingly applied to go to the spring retreat for the student organization that I was a part of. He tried adding me on Instagram, but I'm so glad that I decided not to go to the retreat. It would have been a horrible 3 days of my life. Class was canceled one day, but I had forgotten. I walked to the lecture hall and waited for a minute before someone approached me. I didn't recognize him, but he reminded me that class had been canceled. I said thanks and started walking back to my apartment. A few days later, I was on the phone with my manager before my class started. People were walking into the classroom, but I stood outside while I finished my call. The same guy from the day before approached me again. "We can go into the classroom now," he said. I was talking to my boss, so I just nodded and told him okay, but didn't really make an effort to engage. The day after that, he sent me a friend request on Facebook. We had no mutual friends, no similar groups, and I can't think of any way that he would know my name or profile. On top of that, I use my nickname on my profile and my given name at school. He wouldn't be able to find me without actively searching. Needless to say, I ignored the request. All of this was kind of creepy, but hadn't yet crossed into the realm of terrifying. Today I was walking back from that class again and could hear someone close behind me. At first I turned around really quickly because I thought it would be my friend. It was the guy from my psych class. I pretended not to notice and keep walking. I'm a fairly paranoid person and tend to write off my creeped out feelings as unnecessary anxiety. Still, I tried to walk quickly back to my apartment. I kept my cool until I got to the corner my apartment complex is on. He crossed the street behind me, but lingered at the street sign while I walked into the parking lot. Instead of walking up to my apartment, I went to a staircase and watched from around a corner. He walked into the big parking lot, wandering to where he thought I had gone in. The guy glanced in a couple of windows before walking back to wherever he was actually supposed to be going. I'm not certain if this guy has been trying to follow me or if I'm just paranoid. Update. I've talked to the campus security today. There's not much they can do about stuff online and off of campus, but they can keep tabs on the guy and talk to him if things continue, which is good enough for me. Alright, so I'm a 17-year-old male in my junior year of high school. This happened just yesterday in literature. I got partnered up with some strange kid who had been missing for the first 3 quarters of school. It was his first day back. In class, he asks me like every 5 minutes, just like clockwork, "Hey, you Jewish?" To which I reply no. He seemed to not like Jews because he would keep saying, "Okay, good." Time passes with the occasional, "Hey, are you Jewish?" When he asks me if I can speak Arabic, I told him I could not. He then proceeds to pull out a Quran and read to me from it in Arabic. After he finished reading half the book, forcing me to pay attention, I didn't want to be rude and tell him to stop. He then looks up, smiles, and says, "Are you sure you're not Jewish?" Finally, the bell rings, and I leave without responding. Fast forward to that evening, I get a phone call. I decided to answer, and guess who it is? It's him. All he says is, "Hey, you read that book yet?" Then he hangs up. By the way, I never gave him any contact information. I get several calls over the night from him from 10 p.m. until 3 a.m. 12 calls and 5 voicemails, one of them confirming that it was him. I found out today that he attempted to unalive himself, and his parents sent him to a Muslim Reformation clinic, or something like that, for 3 quarters of the school year. I also learned about his violent fits and being suspended for threatening countless times in other schools. I feel terrible for him, but I'm scared. Edit. I told my parents. They called the number, but no one would talk to them, and eventually they stopped picking up. They're calling the school on Monday, and I'll approach a teacher myself as well. As I entered my freshman year of college, I was looking to make a change from high school by being social. About the second week into class, I see one of my classmates sitting out in front of the room reading a textbook. Well, it happened to be the Intro to Computer Science textbook, another class that I was taking. I said hi. We started talking, and he suggested that we be study buddies. I agreed and gave him my number. That was my first mistake. About 2 weeks after that, I started getting weird texts that later progressed into him telling me that he knew that I was in love with him and that I need to be patient. Never sending him a text or even responding to him. I was hoping, by ignoring him, that he would go away. Second mistake. At this point in time, I had done nothing but give him my number for studying purposes. About a week after that, he started following me from my pre-calc class to the next class, which was nowhere near his class. He then started randomly appearing beside around campus. then to learn my friends and follow them to find me. He found all the clubs that I was in, and I never told him which ones I had joined. A couple of my friends caught on to this and would send me messages to run, but it became pointless. To make matters worse, during all of this I had attracted the attention of the boy that sat next to me in pre-calc, that would lean over in the middle of class and tell me that he was going to request pictures of me when he died to go in his coffin with him. This guy started following me as well to protect me from the first guy. This only made the first follow me around more, because he wanted to protect me from the second guy. I didn't escape them until Christmas break, and I barely escaped them. I had to never set out in an open area of campus, and I also had to change where I lived. In 2017, in my last semester of high school, some friends and I decided to skip the pep rally for the girls' varsity basketball team making the playoffs for the first time. My last period of the day was theater tech. I was just taking it as a fine arts credit, and two friends of mine in the grade below me were in that class with me. We decided to skip the pep rally, leave school early, and go to the nearby Taco Bell like we did every day. However, administrators and security guards patrolled the parking lots to catch kids trying to skip, so we took a detour through the nature trail on campus in order to avoid them. Once on the trail, we came across this kid that I hadn't seen before. He was a skinny white dude with shaggy black hair, wearing baggy jeans and a plain white t-shirt. He was shorter than me, but the most notable thing about him was his general look of dishevelment. His hair was wild and full of leaves and twigs. His plain white t-shirt was dirty, and the knees of his jeans were stained green and brown. He seemed like he had been crawling around in the nature trail. I remember wondering if he lived there for a split second. When we came upon him, we were walking one direction, parallel to the school into the back of the parking lot, and he was coming directly towards us. I knew the nature trail well enough to know there was a bend that led deep into the woods, and I figured he had come from there. He was out of breath, and he looked scared. My two friends said hi to them. My friends were in a grade below me, and later told me that the kid was in their grade and were just acquaintances with two of my friends. It was supposed to be just a quick hello, but I couldn't help but notice how scared he looked and how suspicious he seemed of us. He asked us what we were doing in the woods, and we told him we were skipping the pep rally. One of my friends asked, "What have you been doing out here, camping?" Me and my other friend gave a nervous laugh, but the kid didn't crack a smile. He explained that he was dropped off at school that morning and was supposed to get on a bus to take him to DAEP. DAEP was the alternative school that kids who got suspended from our school went to. His plain outfit started to make sense now. It was the infamous uniform of the alternative school. He then explained that he didn't want to go to the alternative school, so when his mom dropped him off, he pretended like he would wait for the bus, and then hid in the nature trail the full 8 hours of the school day. He was still acting really skittish, and without even looking at each other or speaking to each other, my friends and I could feel that something wasn't right, and there we were in some kind of danger. The kid looked around nervously often, as if seeing if someone might have followed us, or if we were alone in the woods. We hit him with an, "All right, man, well, good luck. We're going to try to get to our cars and go home before the pep rally ends." When he heard the word cars, he perked up. He started walking with us towards the parking lot, continuing to talk. He becomes a lot more friendly and asks if we can give him a ride home. We give him some half-baked excuse why we couldn't. We didn't expect him to ask that. I never met him and my friends barely knew him. But he doesn't take no for an answer. He tells us that people were going to start looking for him pretty soon, and that he was going to be in a lot of trouble. We tell him that he'd probably be fine hiding there, that deep in the nature trail. But he tells us, "Nah, man, you don't understand. I broke into a car at the fellowship." He pointed in the direction of the megachurch that had a parking lot that backed up to my school. I took this. From his waistband, he pulled out a handgun, and I felt sick to my stomach. I had never seen a gun in real life. At this point, I felt really in danger, not just because he had produced a gun. I had never really been scared of them. More so, that the entire interaction felt uneasy. and that the guy was already unsettling and desperate. One of my friends very cautiously tells him that he should probably just ditch it and take off somewhere, and he just stood there, staring at us for an uncomfortable amount of time. His eyes were meeting each of ours. I broke the silence by saying that we wouldn't tell anyone, but that we really had to go before the pep rally ended, and my other stupid friend, who had been virtually silent the entire time, spoke up and said, "Yeah, it's best we're not around if they start looking for you for that," gesturing to the handgun. His eyes narrowed, and once more he asked if one of us could take him home. This time, it felt more like a command. I've never been a super brave person, but in that moment, I don't know why, I just blurted out, "Nah, man, I'm good." Again, there was an uncomfortable silence. Then he asked, "Before you leave, do you guys want to see something?" My first friend was kind of a hothead, and although he was uncomfortable with the situation, he was not afraid of conflict, nor was I. My other friend, however, was not a fan of conflict, and always would de-escalate first. We all looked at each other, and then me and my first friend kind of had an unspoken understanding like, if this is going to happen, we have to run or fight. We might have to do it now. My other friend was very visibly afraid. He asked, "What do you want to show us?" And before the kid could answer, my first friend said, "We don't want to see. We have to go." My first friend started briskly walking past the kid, and me and the other friend quickly followed. Within a few steps, we just started sprinting towards the parking lot. I looked back once we were about 50 steps away. I looked back, and he was still standing there, watching us run. He had put the gun back into his waistband before taking a small adjacent trail back deeper into the woods. By the time we made it back to the parking lot, there were police everywhere. We were sweating, out of breath and terrified. They found the kid in the next 10 minutes. Somehow in the chaos, nobody saw us exit the nature trail and into the parking lot. But since there were so many cops in the parking lot, we decided to just head back inside through another side door to find that the door was locked. That's when an administrator found us, brought us inside, and shoved us into a classroom where we were able to talk with others and find out what was going on. This is what we could piece together from what we learned. Turns out, the kid had skipped DAEP, hid in the nature trail, broke into a car at the church, and stole a semi-automatic shotgun and a handgun from the car. After stealing the guns, he texted his friend and told him that he was about to do something really terrible, and that when she saw his name on the news, she should turn off the TV. He told her explicitly that he was going to use the guns that he stole on kids at school. She knew that he was supposed to be in DAEP and was so worried about the text that she contacted the police. DAEP went on lockdown until the officers got a call from a guy at the church that 2 guns had been stolen from his car behind the school, and that's when they put 2 and 2 together and caught him hiding in the woods. I guess when he saw me and my 2 friends in the nature trail, he quickly hid the shotgun, but didn't have time to hide the pistol, or didn't care enough to hide it. I've always had a soft spot for the elderly, and I guess that's a normal thing considering most people would agree that the elderly are cute and sweet and whatnot. However, usually you don't see elderly men inside of high schools anymore, especially to coach basketball. Right now I'm 18 years old and freshly graduated, but this specific incident started in August of 2019, just before the start of my junior year. My small school hosts open gym, basically practice, for most sports in the early morning all throughout summer. I used to attend since I participated in various sports including basketball. Our school never had any luck with our basketball program and often ran into roadblocks for every season, such as getting new coaches every year, which didn't help the fact that we went almost 3 years without winning a single game. Each year was the same: start open gym midsummer, meet the new coach, and wait until the season started. Until one year the new coach had everyone turning heads and asking questions. I won't share this man's name for obvious reasons, but I'll call him Stan for lack of confusion. We were faced with a seemingly innocent and sweet 79-year-old man who decided to rise from retirement to coach women's basketball, just like the good old days. Now, right before the season started, I was scheduled to have my tonsils removed, which would put me in recovery right up until the day after our first game. Note, at this point in time, I only had had about 2 conversations with Stan, and the day before my procedure, he brought me a cupcake as a sweet treat for a sweet girl, as a sort of good luck during the removal. 10 days after my surgery, I was sent back into an emergency procedure because the cauterizing in my throat had opened. Once I had returned back to school, Stan had met me with a letter saying that he missed me and that he came to visit me in the hospital, only to find that I had already been sent home. Still, I hadn't thought anything suspicious and believed that he was just a sweet old man who kept tugging on my heartstrings. Fast forward through the season, he began to get closer and closer with the team and even gave us a speech at our Christmas party, stating that we made him feel young again and that he loves us. We finished out the season with the time for club volleyball, which was not associated with our school, and tournaments took place on weekends. A few friends and I started noticing that Stan would show up to my volleyball games on the weekends, wishing us good luck and giving us hugs when he left. We thought this was sweet, and again thought nothing of it. COVID now hits and we're forced to close down school and have absolutely no in-person contact with coaches or teachers, considering it was the beginning of the peak, and they were still hoping to open back up if things died down. This is when Stan asked for my phone number. He claimed that he wanted to keep in touch and send me basketball boot camp workouts to stay in shape and ready for next year's season. Very quickly, this turned into him sending multiple I love you texts, heart and heart eye emojis, each day, and very soon after, he began asking to come over to personally help me with the boot camp workouts. I agreed that if my parents were home and we were outside practicing, it wouldn't be a big deal. This escalated the situation rapidly and began opening more doors for him and giving him more opportunity to further this relationship. Soon, the 1-hour-a-week visit turned into him driving 45 minutes to my house randomly to visit for 3 hours 3 to 4 times a week. I was not happy to see him anymore and began getting very worried and nervous to see him anytime he would show up. I tried to stop answering his texts, and he started saying things like, "You don't love me like I do," or "Am I not your favorite coach anymore?" I was manipulated into thinking that the way that he was speaking to me for so long was normal behavior, when it very much was not. I was afraid to tell my parents how he said unwarranted things to me, because I knew how much they trusted him, and I felt bad and guilty. I was manipulated and groomed. The last straw for me, however, was 2 days before my 17th birthday, when he came to practice and brought me a necklace with a 3-page typed-up letter from him to me. I wasn't a very fast reader, but he insisted that I read it in front of him, so I barely skimmed it to amuse him, and I decided I would just read it later. After I finished reading it, he continuously asked me if I was going to show it to my parents, or if I would keep it to myself. I just brushed it off and said something like, "I don't know, we'll see." When I got home, I put the letter on my bedside table drawer and completely forgot about it. A couple visits later, he began asking me questions like, "Do kids your age have intercourse?" and other very weird and inappropriate conversations. This was when I remembered about the letter and decided that I needed to read it. When he left, I read the letter and was completely in shock. He basically professed his love for me and asked if we could have more time together after I graduate. He asked me to never forget about him and how he had bonded with me more than any other player. He finished the letter with a picture of a heart and a key, and it stated that I had the key to his heart. Mind you, he's a married man. Attached to the letter was a pros and cons list of my basketball ability, which included statements like, "Has a great figure," and "Loves her coach very much" in the pros section. I don't know, but if you ask me, that doesn't really have anything to do with basketball. I finally bucked up and decided that it wasn't worth it and that I needed to tell my parents. They both felt incredibly bad that they hadn't seen it and that everything happened to me. A few phone calls later, he was told not to contact me and was soon after fired from his coaching job and had also had his coaching license taken away. This particular encounter still freaks me out I know how horrible it could have ended, and I sometimes thank my crippling social anxiety, as well as general common sense, for preventing the worst. My freshman year of high school, when I was about 14, proved challenging socially. Afraid to really connect with strangers, I would typically eat lunch by myself or sit in the back of a classroom to avoid detection. I did have a few close friends from band, and I also grew fond of an equally awkward girl in my public speaking class. Now, because our public speaking teacher was also the drama teacher and cared much more about the musical than assigning us speeches, we never had to stand up in front of the class. Instead, I would walk into the room, sit down next to my friend, and talk to her for about an hour until the bell rang. After probably about 3 months, this class became a nightmare. I was walking through the halls one day in between classes when I was approached by a fellow freshman that I knew from band. She handed me a piece of paper and winked at me. "This is from Zach," she said. I believe that I stared at her rather blankly, earning me an eye roll. "The Zach that sits behind you in public speaking," she clarified. Still confused but not wanting to appear stupid, I smiled, nodded, and thanked her. I put the note in my backpack and resolved to read it when I returned home that evening. Once in the comfort of my bedroom, I retrieved the note after recalling a very tall and large senior named Zach who did, in fact, sit behind me in that class. I didn't remember ever speaking to him, but thinking it might have been a message from the teacher, I opened the lined paper up. As I skimmed the words, I immediately became uncomfortable. Printed in sloppy handwriting was a cheesy love poem. In it, he described all of my physical features, mentioned my full name, which he spelled correctly, a feat in which not many people can accomplish, and professed his undying love. Now, I was very, very confused. I had never even spoken to this kid. I only ever talked to the other freshmen in the class, and I had no account on any social media platform where he could have lifted the information. Even if I did know him, my mental issues would have definitely prevented any sort of long-term relationship. At this point, I was honestly a little more scared at the prospect of having to speak to someone I did not know than the actual poem, but I still began to skip that particular class. After not attending public speaking for a good 2 weeks, I was eventually approached by a girl that I knew from band, a fellow clarinet player by the name of Corey. "I heard you've been ditching," she said with a bit of a smirk. "Good girls don't ditch." When I just laughed and shrugged, she continued, "Well, your boyfriend thinks you're avoiding him." "What? The Zach guy? He's definitely not my boyfriend. I have some classes with him too. I think he's a nice guy. You should give him a chance. He likes you a lot." Wanting to end the conversation, I just said that I would think about it and walked away. I think that Corey told Zach what I had said, and things escalated. I received a similar poem taped to my locker a few days later, and I began to see Zach standing outside of my classes as I left. Because he was blocking the door, I had no choice but to talk to him. I don't remember the exact conversation, but I remember that he pulled out a large black binder and handed it to me. He told me that he was a writer, and that all of the pages were filled with poems for me. After flipping through some very cringeworthy writing, I believed that I thanked him, not wanting to hurt his feelings. He interpreted that as a go-ahead for a kiss, and I became pinned to a wall. This guy was well over 200 pounds, so he had quite the advantage physically against a small 14-year-old girl. When he finally came up for air, smiling like he had just won the ultimate prize, I told him that I was running late for my next class and he released me. I felt assaulted and even more freaked out, but I never told anyone about this. I never told anyone even when he began to wait for me by my brother's car. He went to the same school and drove me home. I never told anyone even when I saw Zach walking through my neighborhood, staring at houses intently like he was trying to figure out which one was mine. I had to change all of the routes I took to get to my classes, and I would sneak out back doors just to avoid him. I guess I figured that the school year was almost over, and once he graduated, my problems would resolve themselves. However, about a month later, I was leaving the school with a couple of band friends. It was around midnight after a musical performance. I was in the pit orchestra, and we were just going to grab a bite to eat at Village Inn. As I made my way to my friend's car, I felt hands grasp me around my waist. Spinning around in fright, I noticed Zach had me pinned against a different car. "I haven't seen you in a while," he said, "but that's okay. Love transcends time." I think I just smiled uncomfortably and said something about being busy with the musical. It wasn't a lie. He ran his hand up my back and wrapped it around the back of my neck. I know you're super busy, and that got me thinking. I love you more than anything, and I know that we're young, and I know that I don't have a ring, but please run away with me. Please marry me." Completely stunned and paralyzed, one of my friends arrived. She overheard the conversation and picked up on how freaked out I was, and she swooped in. "Hey," she said, "we have to leave right now. Sorry. My mom wants me home in like 5 minutes, and she will not be happy if I'm late. Come on." She grabbed my arm and wiggled my body free from Zach. "Wait, so will you?" Zach asked as my friend dragged me away. I said something stupid about having to think about it, and I made it into my friend's car without any other problems. We laughed and joked about it later, but it scared me enough to make my cautiousness to the next level. For the rest of the school year, I made complex plans on how to travel between classes so I would not see him, and I made sure that I walked to and from any car with a group of people. Again, I never told anyone, even though an 18-year-old adult man proposing to and stalking a young girl was more than not okay. I wish I had, though, and I wish it ended there. A few years ago, when I was about 21, I was scrolling through my Facebook page when all of a sudden messages from people I had not talked to in years began flooding in. They all said something along the lines of, "Holy cow, this is creepy. Oh my God, are you okay?" And they included links to a news article. Apparently, Zach had been arrested for videos of people under the age of 18 and for multiple counts of doing unspeakable acts to a minor. A couple of girls mentioned in the article I even knew from high school. I was pretty decent friends with them too, even though they were freshmen when I was a senior. I just hoped that he did not hurt them because they were friends with me. He's in jail now for a very, very long time. However, if you search my name through Google, you will still find books that Zach actually published containing hundreds of poems that he dedicated to me. But I am honestly just glad that he is locked up and unable to hurt any more girls. This story takes place about 5 or 6 years ago when I was in high school. In high school, I was awkward and weird, and was definitely not one of the girls that all the guys wanted. That being said, I mainly resorted to talking to guys over Facebook, and many of the guys I spoke with were mutual friends of my existing friends. Although this was my main source to fuel my boy craziness, I did foolishly also flirt with a few guys at school and sent them pictures, etc. Keep this in mind for later. One day when I was younger, probably sophomore or junior year, I met a guy named Alex. Alex, who was my same age, was interested in me from day one, and I was interested in him. The only strange thing about his account being his profile picture, which was a few years old. We began texting back and forth every day, grew feelings, and even referred to each other as significant others. Eventually, our conversation started to bore me, and Alex seemed a lot more interested in me than I did in him. One day I got a friend request from a guy named Silos, with Alex being the only mutual friend. I quickly accepted the request and began to examine the profile. Silos seemed to be my age, a blonde, Bieber-haired type kid who was apparently an MMA fighter in California. To be fair, his pictures all looked different, and I knew it had to be a fake account, but I foolishly began talking with him regularly. At this point, Alex and I decided to just be friends, as I told him I wasn't exactly ready for a relationship, especially a long-distance one with someone who lived a few hours away. At this point in time, I never had a boyfriend at all, and was actually horrified of the idea of actually getting close enough to someone to date them. Silos and I continued talking every day, but he'd randomly disappear at times. I also had his brother and sister added on Facebook, and they'd message me saying whatever he was going through or why he was away. All the while, I'd text Alex every now and then, talking about life and how I had now been involved with Silos. Alex was never jealous for some reason, but always acted protective of me. One day, Silos disappeared. I tried messaging him often with no luck ever. Eventually, Alex revealed that Silos and his siblings were fake profiles. This I had known deep down, but I still had been upset with Alex upon finding out. Naturally, I stopped speaking to Alex. He'd always try to contact me, and I would ignore the messages or tell him that I didn't want to speak. The whole ordeal was sort of sketchy because of the personal information that I had revealed to him, including where I went to school and worked. Alex stopped contacting me regularly, although I've had the same phone number since middle school and still have it. So every now and again, I'd get a message from him, even within the past couple of years. Fast forward to the first day of senior year. I walked into my first period class and there he was, sitting at a computer. I guess he had moved to my town and registered to go to my high school. Very weird, because I expressed explicitly that I didn't want to be with him or have contact with him. It was also quite apparent why he hadn't changed his profile picture in so long. He looked a lot different in person, sort of scary even. I know that's mean, but I was a young girl. Naturally, I'd be scared because he didn't look anything like he had in the past, and he looked pretty angry in general. So for the whole semester, I avoided him. Didn't talk to him or even look at him, yet he'd always be staring at me. Even now, the whole experience feels so surreal. I actually blocked it from my subconscious and never told anyone. I only remembered randomly from reading some of the posts on here. Nothing bad came of the experience, apart from my crippling anxiety about the whole situation. I never spoke to him in person or even on the phone, only text messages. I didn't tell my parents or friends out of humiliation about the situation that I'd gotten myself into. I never wanted to confront him because I didn't want to make him mad. He had many pictures of me, if you know what I mean, and didn't want those to be exposed either, because there were a few other guys at school whom I'd sent the same photos to as well. I know I was horrible back then, and I didn't want the whole school to know what I'd done, said, or sent to these people. Basically, I made myself go to school every day and act like nothing was wrong, but was actually sick with fear and anxiety. He never approached me. I don't know if he was nervous too or what. He'd always tell me that he had a dark, mean side, and that he didn't want to hurt me, so this made me even more scared. The semester ended, and I didn't have any more classes with him for the rest of my time in high school. Come to think of it, I don't remember seeing him around at all after that semester. Maybe he left because I wouldn't talk to him. A year or so after graduating, I got a message from him saying that he was going to enlist in the Army. I did not respond to this message, and I ended up quitting the job that I used to have in high school. After about a year and a half away from my old job, I ended up actually going back to work at that same place, and come to find out, when I was away, there was a guy named Alex who fit his description who'd come in and ask for me. To this day, I've never spoken with him or interacted with him in any other way than messaging, but I'm grateful it didn't turn into something worse than just the creepy stuff listed above. I had a physics teacher in grade 11 or 12 that was cool for the most part, but definitely kind of flirty with girls. I remember during tests, he would do weird things like look over my shoulder to see what I was writing, then take an item from my desk to mess with me. Weird, but not alarming. One time, I cannot remember exactly what he said, but it prompted me to throw a pin at him. I didn't mean for it to hit, but it did, right on his head. I felt so bad and apologized profusely. I didn't get in trouble, but I guess it became one of the many jokes of the year. After I graduated high school, he messaged me on Facebook asking if I wanted a job. I was in university at the time, focused on my studies, so I said no. He kept going, saying that it was a job at a massage parlor, and it involved happy endings. I blocked him and didn't hear from him again. Anyways, now I don't feel so bad about the pin incident, but I do feel worried about the girls that he teaches in high school. This happened at school when I was 7 or 8. We used to have compulsory evening preps where we would study from 7 to 9. There were no excuses. Even us day schoolers had to attend. On that evening, one of the teachers sent me and my friend to go and take some keys to the boys' dormitory warden. It was around 8 p.m., so it was very dark. My friend and I were apprehensive about going there because the path to the dorm was very dark, but we couldn't refuse the teacher, so we went. As we were walking, one boy jumped out and scared us. It was so sudden that we immediately started running. As we ran past by a bigger group of boys that were hiding in a corner. When they saw us pass, they immediately started chasing us and shouting that they only wanted to play. This made us run faster towards their dorm. We realized that the only way back was where the boys were chasing us from. It looked like the end for us. I desperately looked around to see if there was a way of escaping, and I saw a newly dug garden that was next to the boys' dorm. I swiftly steered my friends towards it, and as we got closer, we realized that it had a fence, but luckily it had spaces in between that we were able to squeeze through, and ran like hell back to the teacher. When we got to him, we tried to tell him that the boys had tried to grab us in the dark, but all he said was that they were just playing. I got so mad that he wasn't taking it seriously, but he just shrugged and instead got mad at us for not delivering the keys. Immediately, my dad came to pick me up, and we went home. I told my parents what happened, and they changed me to a much better school. I later found out that my friend had left the school too. I'm so glad that garden didn't have a normal fence, or we would have been attacked. This is something that happened to me when I was around 15 or 16. I'm currently 24 years old and a female, and I used to be painfully shy as a kid, so I had a few small groups of friends that I would always hang around. My first day of sophomore year, I met this guy, let's call him Seth, 18 or 19-year-old male, in one of the classes who seemed a little strange. I didn't think too much of it at the time because he seemed really nice. Finally, it was time for my favorite period, lunch. Lunch was reserved for my favorite people, two boys who graciously accepted awkward 13-year-old me after a dramatic move to my dad's home. One of the boys was actually my best friend and my first boyfriend, let's call him Jay. So we were really close, and I trust him more than anyone else. The other, let's call him Harry, was in the same class with me where I met Seth. Anyway, I sat at our table and we began to start comparing teachers when Seth randomly joins our table. I figured that he was one of their friends, so we just continued like normal. After a few weeks, I started getting a little creeped out by Seth. He seemed to be everywhere I went in the school and always stood way too close. If I asked him to step back, he would point out the other guy friends who stood closer. It was usually the same two guys he would use as examples. For context, I'm in a wheelchair and he was very tall, so my head was the same level as that area. I eventually found out that he had seen my school login and saved it to his computer. Now, I didn't want to immediately freak out and report him, so I decided that I was going to just ask him to delete it. He said that he would, and that was the end of that. As months go on, Seth started to get worse. The class we had together was a film class where the students would go out during the period in groups to do the project independently. This was very scary because he would immediately claim me in his group, and I was too nice to decline, until we were put in pairs. He always tried to get me to go film with him in the back fields behind our school. The way he would suggest it got me so scared that I would refuse to leave the room. My teacher was amazing and didn't force anyone to go out. He would end up doing it alone and I would edit. While Seth was out, I decided to see if he deleted my login. He hadn't. He had at least 20 other logins saved on this document, and I was scared enough to report it to my counselor. My counselor was a complete idiot and decided to tell him that a girl in his class reported him. I found out because the next day he came to lunch and started accusing me, and he seemed really angry. I denied it, and Jay and Harry stuck up for me. It was shortly after this that I found out that neither of my friends knew Seth. He only knew of me when he joined our table. My counselor decided that my concerns were not important enough to notify our teacher or police. I guess it was not serious enough to warrant anything outside the school. They didn't even notify my dad. After everything happened with the report, he went back to being creepy, but in a worse way. Every day he would try to convince me to go with him somewhere behind our school, and it had gotten to the point that he was trying to tell me that I had to. He would make up excuses for us to go somewhere alone. I didn't tell anyone about it besides the school and my teacher later, because at that time I wasn't sure if I was just being crazy. I think my friends might have expected he was getting too pushy, because they started walking with me to classes when they could. I ended up telling my teacher what was going on, and he immediately started assigning seats, and talked to another girl in my class to see if I could permanently join her group. Seth graduated at the end of that year and decided to resurface in my email box when I was 17 or 18. I blocked him. First things first, English isn't my first language and some phrases are difficult to translate. I'm now a 34-year-old. This is the story of my first creepy encounter by myself. But listening to my mom before she died, it seems my fate is and was to always be a magnet for creeps. So, a lifetime to tell about. I mentioned this in several other posts and now have had the time to poke my memories. I remember more of my feelings and thought than timelines. So I hope that I don't miss too much in this story. I was in the 3rd grade. In my country, that's either 9 or 10 years old. I was born January 2nd, so I get confused a lot. In any case, I think it was autumn, as it was warm, and I had been riding my bike to school for a couple of weeks, and kids under 3rd graders weren't allowed to ride bikes because of the busy road. There was a college only 1 kilometer away, so students driving fast and speed bumps were on joke level. For some reason, I stayed late, perhaps on the playground. I can't remember that. When I left from the schoolyard, there was a man a short distance away and he yelled, "Hey, come over here." I looked around to see who was yelling, and he was the only one there. I think there were even no cars in the parking lot. I was worried that he might have meant me. I turned towards home, which was luckily away from him. That's when he yelled, "Come here now," when it's standing. For context, when it's standing is slang for when it's excited in my country. I only slightly knew this was something adults do, and it's very bad for kids. I sped up and took shortcuts to lose him. I think he was drunk, so running and taking the shortcuts may have been unnecessary, but at the time I felt that it was a must. I got home, slammed the door, shut it, and never told this story to any adult until I was 25 to 30 years old. After telling this to my best friend while drunk, she told me very gently she thought that I might need therapy. She was right. I'm not sure why I kept it a secret. I might have been scared to lose my privilege of riding my bike, although I'm quite sure my mom would never take anything away, especially something that I needed to get away from an adult harassing me. I might have felt guilt for staying late in school. To this day, I can't remember. Those are just guesses. My mom was a single parent. I met my dad only twice or 3 times a year until he died when I was 15. This wasn't the first time that I met a creep around that school, so I may post another story later on. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope you enjoyed them, and I hope you enjoy the extra rain at the end. I hope you get an excellent night's sleep, and I'll read to you in the next video. Good night, everybody.